brief overview of all of the backend code that we have. Now this is entirely optional. This is just to familiarize you a bit more with the code that we've brought in and how we're going to use it. So our server is being run in our app.js file. This is our main file. We're bringing in Express and Next with a bunch of other stuff. We're loading our entries from the .env file. We're bringing in our models, which we've created in our models files, where we're describing what our post and user data needs to look like to our database. We're bringing in our routes, our endpoints, from the routes folder, and bringing in some passport configuration to do our authentication. We have our familiar dev and port variables. Our root URL variable will check to see if it's a dev environment that we're in, and we'll use localhost, otherwise it'll use our production URL. We'll pass the value of the dev variable to Next and create our app, as well as our GET request handler. We'll connect to our database with mongoose.connect. We'll listen for a success in our then statement and any errors. We'll create our Next server with app.prepare, and in the then we'll create our Express server. If we're not in development, we'll secure our app by using some middleware coming from this helmet package, which gives us some HTTP headers in the interest of security. We'll use the compressage package for gzip compression. Express.json will be for working with our form data for parsing our form data. Express validator, as we saw, to validate our form, our different forms that we'll have in our app. We'll pass any requests made to the Next folder or the static folder to the GET request handler in Next. We'll let Next take care of it. We'll have a session that's coming from the package Express session. We'll pass it to our database with the help of Mongo Session Store, a package called Connect Mongo. We have some session configuration where we set a name for our cookie. We'll add a session secret so we can use signed cookies like we did with Cookie Parser. We'll create this Mongo store. So we'll tell the session about our connection with mongoose.connection. We'll give our cookies the HTTP only flag. We'll give it a max age, a expiration date of in 14 days. We'll use secure cookies. We'll initialize passport. We'll add some custom middleware that will, when we authenticate our user, put the user data on request.user globally within our application, so any controller functions or middleware functions can access user data with just request.user. We'll add some logging with the help of a package called Morgan, and we're going to skip any logs that are coming from the Next folder, any GET requests made to assets in the Next folder. We'll use our routes. We'll supply our routes that we're requiring as middleware. We'll add some error handling for our async await functions, which we'll catch in the higher order function that we've declared in our index file of our routes folder called catch errors. We'll create a custom route for our profile page by getting the params that's coming from the request and passing them back down to the page that we're rendering, our profile page. And we can decide what to do with this user ID value that we're getting from request.params in our component when they're sent down. And then we'll have our catch-all route, our default route, where we're just letting Next handle any other GET requests. So we'll have our routes folder with all of our API endpoints. They'll all be connected to a given function in a controller file. So for example, all of our auth routes will have a corresponding function on the auth controller. So if we look at our controllers, this is what we're going to be filling out to provide the functionality for our API. And then for our models, we'll have a post and a user model. For each of our posts, we'll have a number of properties that we want each of our posts to have. They must have them if they have this required property, and if they don't, we'll return this error message associated with it. So for example, for a post, we're going to need to provide some text, but we don't have to provide an image since that's not required. So they'll all have a type. If we have a property with the type of object ID, we can use the mongoose method populate in order to get some data put within this property that's based on this ref property that we're setting. So for example, in this likes array, we're going to have a number of object IDs of users that have liked a given post. We can use this user ref and the populate method in order to populate, to put the user values associated with this object ID in the likes array. So we can get anything from the user model with the help of the object ID when we call populate. So for example, if for likes we wanted to display user's avatar or their name, we just need to call populate and we can do that. Now we'll have an array of comments for each post, and they'll have text, a created at date, and a posted by object ID, and again we can call populate on it to say get the avatar and the name of a person who has added a comment right next to the comment that they've made. And each post will have a posted by value and a created at date. And then for our user model, it'll have an email property. We can trim all the white space on it by setting trim to true. We can make it lowercase by setting lowercase to true, and we can make it unique by setting unique to true. Now by default, if we don't provide a unique email for a given user, we're going to get a kind of strange error. We're going to get an error saying 11000 duplicate key, and this doesn't make much sense to us as developers, so we're going to use a plugin called MongoDB Error Handler to give us a better unique error. Each user is going to have a name between 4 to 10 characters, so we can set min length and max length to the number of characters we want it to be. We'll also make that unique, and for the avatar, by default, the avatar will reference a file within our static folder, static, images, and then the profile image. We'll have some about text, that's optional, and following and followers will again use object ID. We'll have a ref of user so we can call populate. And we can, in fact, when we create this schema, call populate immediately using this kind of middleware function. So if we know that we want to populate something, a given field, a lot, or use it expressly for that, we can just call populate right after we create the schema and specify the values that we want populated. So for following and followers, we want from the user model every person that we're following and every follower, we want their ID, name, and avatar. And we'll auto-populate everything where we call the method find1. And then finally we have this Passport local mongoose package, which is a plugin, another plugin that we can use in order to basically make the username field the email field, meaning this is going to be the way that we kind of identify each user. This must be unique. And Passport local mongoose will behind the scenes kind of set things up for us that'll make the process of adding Passport to our project a lot easier. So in a nutshell, that's what our backend code looks like. You can, if you're interested in learning more about this schema, the schemas, the server code, I've included a ton of comments, so feel free to peruse those. If you're interested in taking a more detailed look at all this. But without further ado, we'll head over to our controllers files and start filling out these functions.